Welcome into this crossover Thursday Locked On Bears, Locked On Bills podcast. I'm Lorin Cox from Locked On Bears alongside Joe Marino from Locked On Bills, previewing what will be seemingly a one-sided matchup between, at least when you look at the records of these two teams, on a rare Saturday game here late in the season. This crossover Thursday podcast is presented by our friends at Prize Picks. Prize Picks is so much fun and it's easy to play. There's no competing against other players. It's just you versus the projections available. Pick 2 to 5 players, and if they score more or less than their Prize Picks projection, you can win up to 10 times your money on your entry. It literally can take less than 60 seconds to enter. It's that easy. We love Prize Picks, and we know you will too. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with our promo code LOCKEDON. That's prizepicks.com, promo code LOCKEDON. As we get into some of the biggest storylines for this game, Joe, you and I were just talking before the game. It feels weird. It feels like it's small talk when we talk about the weather, but in a game like this, it's big talk. It really can have a big impact on how things roll this way. How are you sort of feeling about Buffalo coming into a potentially cold and windy Soldier Field this weekend?
Yeah, Lorin, first of all, good to be on here with you. We always have good football conversations, so this is one of the crossovers I've really been looking forward to this year. And like you said here, the weather is going to be a big storyline, and it's not a situation where the Bills aren't used to cold, windy, perhaps some elements, right? That's normal in Western New York, just like it is in Chicago. But I think in a game like this, it's very much a neutralizer. I think this is good for Chicago, and it's not that the Bills can't play in wind or they can't play in cold. It's just that whenever there are elements, it favors the lesser team. And I think we can all recognize here that the 3-11 Bears are the lesser team in an 11-3 matchup against the Bills. It's not a slight against Chicago. It's just the reality that we're living in right now. Yeah. And Lorin, I think there's some really interesting dynamics with this game. First of all, the Bills have a chance to win and clinch the AFC East for the third consecutive season. You know that they're going to want to check that box as early as possible. Their first chance to do that is on Saturday. But with this being a road weather game, like I said, it favors the Bears, and the Bears have been a good team at home. Not necessarily that they have a great record, but they've been a very competitive team. We know they haven't packed it in. They took the Eagles to the brink last week. I know that they're on a 7-game losing streak, but 4 of those 6 have been decided by 5 points or less. When you talk about the 7 home games that the Bears have played this year, they've all either been wins by the Bears or settled by 1 score, with the exception of the Packers game that was 28-19 at the end, and the Bears led by 2 scores entering the fourth quarter. And so this Bears team is not to be taken lightly at all when it comes to them playing at Soldier Field. And it's a young football team, first year under the regime, right? Ryan Poles, Matt Eberflus, their first year together with a lot of young players that are wanting to prove that they're part of the plan moving forward. And these are going to be critical opportunities for those players to showcase themselves well for this current regime and obviously for the league that's going to be watching this tape, right? So there's a lot to play here for when it comes to the Bears in an environment that I think favors them. And I think the elements here introduces a level of variance that helps the Chicago Bears. So for as much as I think people probably look and see Bears, Bills, the circumstances, 11-3 versus 3-11, let's be honest here. I think that there's a big job here by this Bills coaching staff to make sure that they don't take Chicago lightly, or else they're not going to clinch the AFC East on Saturday afternoon.
Yeah, that's actually where I was going to go next. When the Bears played the Eagles so close last week, and even leading up into that game, there was some talk and thought that maybe, could you catch the Eagles looking ahead a week? They have Dallas this week, and that being the much bigger game on their schedule than the Bears last week. And I look at Buffalo, and I see after this game at Cincinnati, I mean, a team that's right up there with them, trying to push for those top seeds in the AFC. Do you have any concern of that being something? I mean, is there past examples of this Bills team having issues with that sort of thing, playing down a little bit to an opponent when they have a bigger game on the schedule, or do you think they're going to treat it as normally as they can?
Well, I think it's a valid talking point, Lorin. The Bills are going to play the Bengals next week, Monday Night Football on the road, and probably for the number 1 seed in the AFC. Both the Bengals and the Bills, a lot of B teams here. Both the Bengals and the Bills have a head-to-head win over the Chiefs. And so unless somebody has a hiccup along the way, which is possible, right? We saw the Texans take the Chiefs to overtime, right? This stuff can happen. But most likely the winner of Bengals and Bills is going to be the 1 seed in the AFC. So you can naturally kind of introduce some talking points about it being something that can be a look-ahead opportunity for Buffalo. But I do go back to the leadership of this team, whether that's Brandon being the GM, Sean McDermott, his outstanding coaching staff, Josh Allen, really high-impact players that are good leaders. And they've always been very 1-0 focused, right? 1 week at a time. And so I don't think that if the Bills lose this game, we'll be able to say, yeah, they were looking ahead to Cincinnati. I think that the stuff that we just talked about with this being a young, hungry Bears team that's played competitive ball games all year at home under these elements with that quarterback, Justin Fields, I think that's why they'd lose the game if it ultimately happened.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think that's a lot of what Chicago is looking at entering this game too. It's how can these young players step up and try and prove themselves a little bit against some real quality opponents. Not that there's any expectation for pulling off the upset like this, but they hung a little bit with the Eagles and kind of said, hey, like the Bears are not at that level yet, but maybe there's some foundation here. Maybe there's some aspects of this team that are getting closer to competitive with some of the best teams in the NFL. Can they show that again against the Buffalo Bills? Because I think when you saw the Eagles game, Jalen Hurts made a couple of really just poor interceptions in there that helped the Bears out, and they fumbled. And it's like, so will Josh Allen come into a game like this? Can he just take care of the ball? Can the Bills get out of their own way and make sure that they're not keeping the Bears in it by making those kind of mistakes, having a reckless throw here, or maybe it's the wind, right? He tries to fire in a ball somewhere that it's a tighter window throw, and that those windows are a little different when it's 30 miles an hour and freezing cold, hard football flying that way. I mean, it really does offer a certain level of unpredictability here. And in a matchup like this, volatility has to benefit the lesser of the two teams more so than the greater of the two teams. Because if everything went as expected, the Bills would be the ones pretty firmly in control here. But it's going to come down to how the talent of these two teams match up one-on-one. And we're going to go through some of the key matchups in this game as our Crossover Thursday podcast continues right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. This episode is brought to you by Audible. Audible is releasing a slate of new football podcasts that I think you're really going to like. That's why you'll be able to find an episode from The League available as a bonus episode on our Locked On NFL channel. It's narrated by Super Bowl champion and legendary smack talker Richard Sherman, along with sports broadcaster and rising star Taylor Rooks. The League is an 8-part docuseries about the most bizarre, inspirational, and unlikely stories connected to America's favorite sport, pro football. You don't want to miss these untold stories spanning from the 1940s through the present. And each one offers equal parts history, entertainment, and social commentary. Head on over to the Locked On NFL channel for a bonus episode of The League, or catch the full series wherever you get your podcasts. Available now. Audible. Get in the game. All right, Joe, as we get into this Bears-Bills matchup on Crossover Thursday, where do you see the matchups, the one-on-ones or the position group battles that you think are going to go really a long way towards deciding whether the Bears can pull off the miracle type upset in this game?
Well, listen, I think this conversation has to start with Justin Fields against the Bills defense. And I am an unapologetic fan of Justin Fields. I loved him at Ohio State. He was my QB2 a couple years ago when he came out. And I thought the Bears just got an absolute steal with the number 11 pick in the draft. And I don't know that the Bears have the right stuff around him right now for him to be the best version of himself, but my goodness, he doesn't care. He's out there making plays, and obviously he's a quarterback, and so you look at the passing production, and it's not that great in terms of a volume. But I thought there was some situational stuff that, as I studied Justin Fields this week as a passer, that really impressed me, particularly how well he's handling the blitz this year, making a lot of plays, making a lot of teams pay for blitzing him, a 109 passer rating when blitzed. And he's having some success pushing the ball down the field. And we know he's got the really dynamic physical skill set in terms of size, arm talent, and athleticism. We're talking 6'3", 230 pounds, a 4'4" athlete that can push the ball to any part of the field that he wants to. And that level of skill is going to develop very nicely as Chicago builds things around him. But my goodness, this guy's a problem as a runner. 1,000 yards on the dot, 7 yards per carry, 8 touchdowns. He's 7th in the NFL in rushing yards. I'm not saying anything that Bears fans don't know, but I want to reiterate a lot of this for Bills Mafia as we now collaborate on this conversation.
Yeah.
We're talking about a guy that's averaging 4.35 yards after contact per rush. That's number 1 in the NFL among the 50 players with 75 carries or more. 36 missed tackles forced. That's 16th in the league among the 50 players with at least 75 attempts or more. And so for a Bills defense that I think is a very poor, and I mean very poor tackling defense, not only does that stand up when you look at whatever metric you want to, whether it's Pro Football Reference or PFF, you'll see that the Bills are a bad tackling defense. They have been for a number of years under Sean McDermott. And I have a lot of great things to say about Sean McDermott, but one of my criticisms is that his defenses, for as good as they are every year, they tackle very poorly. But you've also heard other teams come out after the game and say, hey, the reason we had so much quick passing and screens, it's because we didn't think the Bills were a very good tackling defense. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers said that last year. We've heard that from teams this year, and it has some truth to it. And you look at the Bears, obviously a dynamic quarterback in Justin Fields that is a load for anybody to tackle. They run a ton of screens. I think they have Justin Fields might be the number 2 quarterback in terms of percentage of throws that are screens right behind Aaron Rodgers. So they're going to challenge you to tackle in space. And Lorin, if they get Khalil Herbert back this week, that's going to be a problem for the Bills. All right. So you could see that I have a lot of concern about the way that this Bears offense can challenge the Bills and put some stress on some areas of their team when it comes to tackling that has not been a strength. And you're talking about Khalil Herbert in space. You're talking about Justin Fields in space. There's going to be an opportunity here for the Bills to either step up to the plate and be better than you have, or for them to be exposed. Now, I will say this, the Bills have done very, very well against Lamar Jackson. And I think stylistically, Lamar and Justin are different players. Lamar is maybe a little more twitchy, where Justin Fields is a legitimate tackle breaker. They're different as passers, but I think in terms of conceptually being disciplined with your rush, spying, forcing them to throw the ball to areas of the field that they don't necessarily have a ton of success, I think the Bills by scheme have done very well against that type of quarterback. But this is a different cat in Justin Fields. And he gives me a great level of concern as I consider the matchup here against the Bills defense with Justin Fields at quarterback for the Bears on offense.
It works out because I have a great level of concern about this Bears defense trying to slow down the offense. And I think the matchup I'm really curious to see is how the Bears handle it with Jalen Johnson, and whether they shadow cover Stefon Diggs across the field or whether they kind of just keep them to their sides. There's also some injury questions here with Kindle Vildor in the Bears secondary missing practice to start this week. We'll kind of see whether he's able to go or not, because right now, so base defense is Kyler Gordon and Jalen Johnson on the outside, and then for nickel, Kyler Gordon moves into the slot, and they bring Vildor off the bench as cornerback 3. Last week against the Eagles, they had Jalen Johnson shadow A.J. Brown, but only on the outside. Anytime Brown went in the slot, they said that's Kyler Gordon's going to handle him in the slot, but anytime he's on the outside, Jalen Johnson's follow him to either side of the field. A.J. Brown and the two of them went back and forth, and Brown got a couple of deep shots where it was really great ball, and coverage wasn't terrible, but it was just an even better pass, and even the coverage was kind of there. And Jalen got a couple of pass breakups, including a 4th down slant that he got right in front of and sent down in the turf, and it was a big stop for this Bears defense. Another one in the end zone that saved a touchdown. So there were some real positives in that and some real negatives in that. And I don't know if that's going to give them the confidence to say, okay, go do it again against Stefon Diggs, or maybe they feel like, maybe that was a little bit too much of an ask for Jalen Johnson. Well, so that's what I'm really curious to see is how they decide to handle that with Stefon Diggs, because it wasn't a full shutdown effort, but it did look like progress, and it did look like I found myself a little more encouraged than not against A.J. Brown, who's just one of the best wide receivers in football, and certainly Stefon Diggs is right up there in the conversation with him at the top of the list.
Lorin, another thing that comes to mind for me as I consider this matchup, Bills versus Bears, is it's the Bills offensive line against the Bears defensive line. And I think the Bears have a lot of work to do with their defensive line. And
that's very generous.
Yeah, it is. Right. And so I think to be quite honest with you, and I don't know that the Bills have an upper echelon offensive line, but I think they have a reasonable group that I think should be able to control the line of scrimmage. And in a situation where I worry about the wind just being so significant that it's going to take away from the Bills' opportunities to really win in the passing game. And not that Josh Allen can't cut the football through the wind. We're talking about some 30-mile-an-hour gusts throughout this game. That's just going to make it difficult to throw the football, which puts the onus back on your ability to run it and execute the short passing game, I think, to an extent. And I think the Bills' offensive line should have an opportunity here to control the action and allow this stable of running backs, Devin Singletary, James Cook, Nyheim Hines, Josh Allen, of course, the runner, to be able to control the line of scrimmage and keep things on schedule. And maybe they don't score in the ways that we were typically used to seeing it come from the Bills, which is Josh Allen throwing the football to all of his weapons. It might come more on the ground, but I think the Bills should have an advantage with their O-line against this Bears D-line to control things and manage that side of the game. But like I said, my bigger concern for the Bills is that defense. Bills defense is good, but you just, against a team like Chicago, you got to play different. It challenges you to play a different type of game. And I know that little rant there was about the Bills offensive line, but I can't stop from going back to Justin Fields and the challenges that he presents.
I can't stop being thankful for having Justin Fields here just to make these games entertaining and exciting in December. Your team has 3 wins, and it's like, well, like we said, like this game does not matter a lick for the Bears other than draft position. So there's not really a lot to play for here and a lot to tune in for, but Justin Fields makes it that much more fun and makes it worth like, oh, well, I got to at least see what he's going to do, even if the result of the game isn't going to make a huge difference. Speaking of the results, we will give our predictions on what we're expecting from this one, some final scores, and recap what we're looking for out of this matchup overall as we continue our crossover Thursday podcast, Locked On Bears, Locked On Bills, right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. This crossover Thursday podcast is brought to you by our friends at Bet Online, our #1 sports book recommendation for all of your sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Looking at this Bears-Bills game right now, it's Bears +9. The Bills then, of course, 9-point favorites on the road there. But I think largely due to the weather, you're seeing the over-under at 40.5, which is the lowest it's been for a Bears game in weeks, if not months, for this season. So perhaps the weather keeping the score down a little bit, though. But we just kind of talked about how both these offenses have some potential to score against the opponents in this game. So if you like that over, there's certainly some money to be placed there. And the money line is Bears +330, Bills -410 if you like the upset straight up. Those are the odds that we're going to swing your way every week here from Bet Online. If you love sports, you like latest odds and trends for every professional or amateur league, BetOnline is going to be the place to do it. It's the fastest and easiest way to fulfill all of your sports betting needs. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. Did you know that driving high is considered driving under the influence? That's right. Driving under the influence of marijuana is against the law in every state, even in the states where marijuana is legal. That means driving high could get you a DUI. And if you think law enforcement officers can't tell when you're driving high, you're wrong. Your friends can tell, your coworkers can tell, even your parents can tell. Everyone can tell. So what makes you think that law enforcement officers don't know when you're driving high? Driving under the influence of marijuana can slow down your response time and change how you perceive time and speed. So even if you think you're fine to drive when you're high, you're not. Because the bottom line is, if you feel different, you drive different. And driving high is driving under the influence. So remember, drive high, get a DUI. Paid for by NHTSA. All right, as we look ahead for our predictions here on this crossover Thursday, Bears-Bills, Joe Marino from Locked On Bills, Lorin Cox, Locked On Bears. Joe, like I said, it's a 9-point spread at Bet Online, and I find myself, I mean, the main hesitation there is the weather. That's the one area where it changes the game. I think in a neutral weather situation, if it's just a regular sort of brisk winter day, I think the Bills could cover that. And like my initial feeling was like 27-17 Bills. But with the weather, it just feels like you said, so volatile and unpredictable that you could really see a big swing either direction, either super, super low scoring or, somebody kind of breaks out and has a big game on the side. How do you sort of feel about this one playing out?
Yeah, Lorin, tough to predict. I feel better about the way I think the game's going to go than telling you what I think the score is going to be, but we have to give a score prediction. So I'll throw 24-13 Bills out there and allow me to kind of explain my thought process here. I think you just have two teams that are very different points in their life cycles. Year one of this regime for the Chicago Bears, they're a team in transition. Better days are ahead. I mean, what do they have? $100+ million in cap space, plenty of draft capital at their disposal. That's going to be a big deal for them moving forward. And I'm excited to watch them this offseason. Lorin, you are going to have one hell of an offseason to cover on Locked On Bears. So everybody make sure that you're subscribed to Locked On Bears. There's going to be a lot coming this offseason. But that's not going to help them on Saturday, right? None of that stuff helps them on Saturday. This is a team with even some of their key players have been banged up. Some questions about what the offensive line is going to look like with guys that are out. Receivers, I mean, is Khalil Herbert available? How do they kind of piece this together on defense with, kind of some play? Jack Sanborn was a nice little surprise for them. He's not going to be in the mix. What happens at corner? It's tough, man. It's tough to know. And I know that Matt Eberflus and Alan Williams, a lot of defensive acumen there, but they don't have the dudes, man. They don't have the guys right now. And there's a lot of young players. And I think that the Bills have an opportunity offensively to just put a lot of stress on them and put them in situations where they have to communicate and put them in conflict and, be able to take advantage of a talent advantage that I think that they have offensively to score and really put a lot of stress back on Chicago to be able to keep up. And I don't know if that's going to be able to be the case on Saturday. So I think the Bills do go into Chicago and get this win. But I hope that throughout this conversation, people have heard a level of concern that I legitimately have for the Bills in this football game and the path that is absolutely there for Chicago. And, to the point that you made earlier, the Bills better be dialed in for this game. Can't be looking ahead to Cincinnati because I think there's absolutely a path for Chicago. But if it goes the way that I think it's going to go, I think the Bills come out on top.
Yeah, as much as we talk about, play calling and scheme and game planning and all that stuff, sometimes it just comes down to like
players.
Who's more talented? And you're not going to find even the biggest diehard Chicago Bears fan arguing that they somehow would have more talent right now than the Buffalo Bills. It's just, your guy against our guy and whose guy is better. And you look across the board, you're not going to find too many position groups where Chicago is making that argument or even in the same neighborhood there. Sometimes, it's just a receiver beating a cornerback and they both do their best. And the Bills' best is going to be better than the Bears' best in a lot of those situations. And that's the reality of the situation. Like, I think if the Bears are going to pull off an upset here, it's going to take some of the same things we saw the Eagles do last week, where Josh Allen throws an interception or two it's not even like a great play by the DB. Like one of Hurts's throws just went right into the breadbasket of the safety. He was just standing there and it came right to him because he overthrew a receiver. Like, it'll take a couple of turnovers. It'll take some penalties, killing some Bills offensive drives. And then it'll take, I think, a series of missed tackles from that Bills defense as well, allowing, Justin Fields to have one of those 60+ yard dynamic touchdown highlight reel runs that open some things up and maybe a special teams play here or there to kind of spring something loose. Like, it just feels like that talent deficiency in that gap is so wide that the Bears need something extra that's even outside of their control. I think the Bears can throw everything they possibly have at the Bills, and without, I think, a little bit of extra help from something else that the Bills do wrong on their own, they just don't have the horses to keep up with a team that is very likely going to be in the AFC Championship game, if not the Super Bowl.
Lorin, let me ask you this, because I think it's important for us to kind of consider some of these X factors in a game like we're anticipating on Saturday. And what should we know about the Bears return situation? I know that Velus Jones has been a very vulnerable player this year, made a lot of mistakes. Yeah. I saw he got a chance to do kick returns against the Eagles, and then leaning into Dante Pettis as the punt returner, who doesn't have a ton of experience in that area. And so what insight can you offer to us about the return situation, which I think could play a factor on Saturday? Field positions is going to matter.
Yeah. So, like you said, Velus Jones has had some troubles here. He muffed a couple of punts early in the season, and it's been Dante Pettis ever since. And their special teams coordinator, Richard Hightower, pointed out, like, Pettis is averaging like 9 yards of punt return. Like, to me, he's one of these guys that he's going to take what's there, but he's not the breakaway punt return threat. But he'll do a pretty good job of knowing when to fair catch it, knowing when he can get a few yards here or there, but you're not worried about him being necessarily the dynamic field flipper unless somehow your coverage team just gets so far out of position and overplay something. But he's never been the dynamic athlete that's going to make a bunch of guys miss or outrun everyone on the field. He's just smart and a little bit shifty here and there. We've seen Velus Jones pull off a couple of long kick returns, like around 50 yards, gets them closer to midfield, where you feel like maybe something is coming there. But I will say, last week against the Eagles, Velus Jones had a fumble on offense that Matt Eberflus was clearly unhappy about. And we sort of have the impression that it'll perhaps reduce some of his offensive snaps, but I don't know if they're going to see that as differently from special team snaps. He did kind of say like muff punts are different than fumbles because it's a different technique and it's different situations. So I don't know if that would incline them to take Velus Jones off of kick returns. But if Khalil Herbert is healthy, they could opt to go back to him because he's had a couple of big dynamic returns. I think he may have a touchdown in his career as well. That they like some of the speed that they've got in their options on the kickoff return, but punt I would be a little bit less concerned about.
I appreciate that. I'm a special teams dork, so I like to hear about that stuff.
Let me throw in too. Cairo Santos has missed 5 extra points this season.
Saw that, yeah, and his field goal kicking has been very good, but the extra points have not been kind to him. So that could be an X factor as well.
Halftime of the Eagles game, he said he switched his approach. He was taking every PAT from the right hash and said it became like so routine and robotic for him that he was kind of like turning his brain off. And he said in the second half, he started taking them from the middle and the left, which forcing him to have to think about it a little bit more and be more like deliberate and dynamic. And he said it seems to have fixed the problem. But Bears fans are going to be holding their breath on every single PAT attempt in this game, especially in the wind.
Yeah, and we could see 2-point conversions. It's just, oh man, the weather's going to be interesting, and it's a neutralizer to an extent.
The Bears punted from the Eagles 36-yard line. Like Bears punter was standing at like the plus 45-yard line because the wind kept them out of field goal range. Santos said like 48 yards is my limit in this game, and they were just outside, so they had a 20-yard punt that down at like the 17-yard line. It was pretty pathetic. So let's hope for some less pathetic special teams in this game, Joe. It's been a lot of fun previewing this. I'm glad we get some special teams talk in there. We don't talk enough about special teams on these podcasts, but best of luck to your Buffalo Bills. And I want to thank everyone who's been making Locked On Bills and Locked On Bears their first listen each and every single day. If you're looking for your second listen, check out Locked On Bills if you're a Bears fan, or check out Locked On Bears if you're a Bills fan to get the inside scoop on your team's opponent this week. All the breakdowns from our experts on each and every team. The Locked On Podcast Network is your team every day. We'll be back for you for tomorrow's podcast. And of course, on Monday, breaking down everything we see in this game. So for Joe Marino of Locked On Bills, I'm Lorin Cox from Locked On Bears, and we will talk to you again tomorrow.